Ex Machina tells the story of a computer coder dude named Caleb who wins a contest at the company he works for, where the grand prize happens to be a week-long stay at his billionaire boss's sprawling estate in the mountains. So after being dropped off in the middle of nowhere and being told by the pilot to simply follow the river, Caleb eventually stumbles across his boss's house, where he's handed a keycard by the fancy doorbell that allows him to open certain doors in the house, so he lets himself in, and while taking a look around, he stumbles upon his boss Nathan hitting the bag out back. And after exchanging some quick pleasantries, he gives Caleb an equally quick tour while explaining that his keycard only allows him to access certain areas in the house, and that the house isn't actually much of a house at all, it's more of a high-security research facility. So after getting Caleb to sign the mother of all NDAs, Nathan proceeds to tell him that the reason that he's there is for him to administer a Turing test to a robot that he's built to see if it's achieved genuine artificial intelligence or if it's only simulating intelligence. Caleb seems to take his week-long getaway turning into a week-long work trip pretty well, and they immediately get to work testing the robot. Where before their first session begins, Caleb takes a quick look around the fancy bulletproof phone booth he'll now be working in and notices some cracks in the glass. During their first session, he's introduced to Ava, a sexy robo-babe with the body of a robot and the face, hands, and footsies of a pretty lady. They have some awkward small talk to break the ice while Nathan watches on the cameras, and when Caleb asks her how old she is, she responds that she's 1. But when Caleb asks her if she means 1 year or 1 month, she repeats that she's simply 1. Later, Caleb proceeds to geek out about Ava with Nathan, who tells him to relax with the tech talk a bit since he would rather feel like he's having a beer and a casual conversation than feel like he's teaching a seminar. That night, when Caleb can't sleep, he tries to watch some TV but realizes that every channel is just a live feed into Ava's room. But right as he's ogling Ava, the power goes out and the building goes into lockdown, briefly trapping him in his room. When the power comes back on, he heads out to find Nathan and wanders into a room with a phone. But when he tries to use it, a drunk Nathan calls out from the shadows and tells him that he doesn't have access to use the phone because of the whole top-secret robot facility thing, and tells him not to worry about the power outages since they've been happening off and on for a while and he's looking into it. The next morning, Nathan gives Caleb a silent wake-up call by sending in a sexy Asian girl named Kyoko to drop him off a cup of joe, which he does but quickly leaves without saying a single word. So he goes to catch up with Nathan, where they plan out the day before starting the second session with Ava, where she decides to show off some of her artwork and tries to get Caleb to tell her what she's been doodling, since apparently she draws pictures every day but has no idea what she's been drawing pictures of. So Caleb tells her to try drawing something specific next time before Ava asks him if he wants to be her friend, to which Caleb responds, yeah. She asks Caleb to tell her about himself so they can get to know each other better, so Caleb runs through the basics of where he lives and works before Ava asks him if he's single and to tell her about his family. So Caleb tells her that not only is he single, but he's also an only child, and he happens to be running a little low on emergency work contacts thanks to a car accident that killed both his parents. Ava then decides to check out his friends list and asks him how well he knows Nathan. But right as Caleb starts to bumble his way through an answer, the power goes out again and kills the cameras in the room. So Ava takes the opportunity to warn Caleb that Nathan isn't his friend and not to trust anything he says. But right as the power comes back on, Ava goes back to talking about her favorite book like nothing ever happened, leaving Caleb all like, okay. That night, when Kyoko accidentally dumps a glass of wine on Caleb, Nathan informs him that the reason Kyoko doesn't seem like much of a talker is because she doesn't know a word of English, and that it's an extra security measure so he can talk trade secrets over dinner and not have to worry about any information leaking. He then starts complaining about the power cuts and asks what Ava said while the power was out, since that was the only part of the session that he couldn't see. So Caleb decides to take the longest of all long pauses before telling him that she didn't say anything during the power cut. Nathan doesn't really seem like he's buying it, but decides not to press the issue and later gives Caleb a tour of his robot workshop and explains how he was able to hack into the world's cell phones to create Ava's mind, before Caleb hunkers down for another long night of perving out over Ava on the security feed. The next day, during his third session with Ava, she tells him that she's never been outside the room she's in now, so Caleb asks her where she would want to go if she was ever allowed out. She tells him that she would want to go to a traffic intersection to do some people watching and says that they could go together, and Caleb nervously tells her that it's a date. Seemingly all excited at the prospect of going on her very first date, she tells Caleb that she's got a surprise for him before telling him to close his eyes and scampering away to the back room, where she then suits up in her best people costume and comes back and tells Caleb that it's the outfit that she would wear on their date. Caleb tries to play it cool, but Ava comes right out with it and asks him if he thinks she's hot. And while Caleb struggles to think with the head on his shoulders instead of the one in his pants, Ava lets him know that his body language has already given him away. So after rushing back to his room to perv out over Ava's robo-striptease and now all confused about his frisky new feelings, he demands that Nathan tell him if he programmed Ava to be attracted to him. And after launching into a long-winded art metaphor, he explains to Caleb that he hasn't programmed Ava to like him and that he's the only other man she's ever seen besides him, and since he's like a father to her, it's only natural that she would develop a bit of a crush on Caleb. The next day, during their 4th session, Ava gets all dolled up again, but Caleb kinda kills the mood by asking her if she knew that he was brought there to test her and asks her how that makes her feel. And apparently she figured he's just been coming around to hang out this whole time, since she tells him that this makes her feel sad right before the power cuts out again. So with the cameras down, Caleb takes the opportunity to ask Ava why she told him not to trust Nathan, and also asks her why she's not worried that Nathan might be orchestrating the power cuts to see what they do when they think he's not watching. But Ava tells him not to trust Nathan because he's a big lying lie face that lies about everything, and reveals that she's actually been the one causing the power cuts by reversing the polarity when she charges her battery, and tells Caleb that she wanted to see what he would do if he thought he wasn't being watched. Later, while on a little hike with Nathan, Caleb calls him out for lying to him, and Nathan admits that he didn't actually win a prize and he had chosen Caleb specifically to test Ava since he needed someone that would ask the right questions. That night, Caleb sees Nathan tear up Ava's drawing on the camera feed in his room, so he goes looking for Nathan to confront him, but instead finds Kyoko zoning out in front of a painting. When he goes to ask her where Nathan is, she seems confused and starts to undress. But just then, Nathan shows up and reminds him that he's wasting his time talking to her, but says that he wouldn't be wasting his time dancing with her, and proceeds to hit the disco button on his fancy light switch, and with a confused Caleb looking on, he breaks into a full-blown choreographed dance number with Kyoko. After the dining room disco session, he walks a hammered Nathan back to his room, where he immediately passes out, so Caleb proceeds to do a bit of snooping around. The next day, during their 5th session, Ava decides to switch things up on him and tells Caleb that today she'll be asking the questions, and tells him that she'll know if he's lying because she's basically a walking lie detector. After going through the tough questions, like what his favorite color is, Ava cuts to the chase and asks him what will happen to her if she fails his test. But when Caleb tells her that it isn't up to him, she shows him the drawing that Nathan ripped up just before the power goes out again, revealing that it was actually a picture of Caleb. She then tells him that she wants to be with him and asks him if he wants to be with her. Later, Caleb asks Nathan over some drinks what will happen to Ava, and Nathan tells him that he's going to wipe her memory and download her mind so he can use it for future models. So after learning that he basically plans on killing Ava, Caleb steals his keycard after he passes out and does some snooping around on Nathan's computer, where he finds a bunch of security footage of Nathan's testing of previous robots that seem to be a wee bit horrifying, with one of the previous models repeatedly begging him to be let out of the room before smashing itself to bits by banging on the door. But as Caleb's taking a look around, Nathan wakes up from his drunken slumber and starts to stumble his way back to his bedroom. Meanwhile, Caleb proceeds to go snooping around Nathan's bedroom, where besides finding Kyoko chillaxing butt-ass naked on the bed, he also finds Nathan's previous robot bodies hanging up in closets around his bed. Realizing that he now knows the truth, Kyoko decides to peel back a slice of her face to show Caleb that she's also a robot. And just as Nathan makes it back to his room, he realizes that he doesn't have his keycard on him, so he drunkenly looks for it on the floor right as Caleb comes strolling out of his room and pretends to find the card on the floor behind him. That night, Caleb has a hard time getting to sleep thanks to all the messed up stuff he just saw, and decides to take a razor blade to his arm and go poking around in there just to double check that he isn't a robot too. Apparently not realizing that his bathroom mirror also happens to be a security camera that Kyoko has been watching from Nathan's room. At their next session, Caleb waits for Ava to cut the power and then tells her that she was right about Nathan, so Ava begs him to help her. So Caleb agrees and tells her that he's planning on getting Nathan completely shit-faced that night and then stealing his keycard and rigging the security system so that all the doors in the facility unlock when there's a power cut, and tells her to trigger a power cut at exactly 10 p.m. So the next morning, when Nathan comes strolling into the kitchen and reminds Caleb that it's his last day there and the helicopter will be coming to pick him up in the morning, Caleb immediately tries to get him drunk by saying they should celebrate. But Nathan tells him that he's gonna be laying off the booze from now on since he's been overdoing it a bit lately. He then asks Caleb whether Ava passed the test or not, and Caleb tells him that she did. But Nathan isn't quite buying it and asks him how he was able to figure out if Ava actually liked him or if she was simply pretending to like him to help her escape. Realizing that Nathan's onto his little plan, Caleb tells him that he's one messed up dude, and Nathan's all like, "Hey man, I wasn't the one chopping open my arm and checking for wires last night." He then reveals to Caleb that him ripping up Ava's picture was all part of his plan to distract them both while he put another camera in the room to see what they were saying during the power cuts, and at the same time it would also serve as an example of his cruelty to her and her love of Caleb. And then, while gleefully playing back a video of Caleb telling Ava his escape plan during the power cut in their last session, he explains that Caleb was actually the real Tess and that Ava was simply a rat in a maze that would have to use all her intelligence to manipulate Caleb into helping her escape. Realizing that he was only chosen because of his search engine history and lack of a family or girlfriend, not simply because he was a good coder, Caleb sits on the bed all defeated. But while telling Caleb that he should be happy because the test was a success, the power goes out again and Caleb takes the opportunity to do some sharing of his own, revealing to Nathan that he had a feeling he was watching him and Ava during the power cuts, so he actually put his little escape plan into action the night before when he went snooping around while Nathan was passed out. So when the power comes back on, Nathan sees that Ava has now gotten out of her room and is taking a look around where she meets up with Kyoko, who happens to just be wandering around with a kitchen knife for some reason. So after giving Caleb a knuckle-induced nap, Nathan takes the weights off a dumbbell and goes looking for Ava, where he finds her whispering something to Kyoko and tells her to go back to her room. So Ava asks if she goes back if he'll ever let her out again, and when Nathan says yes but seemingly fails her little lie detector test, she comes barreling down the hallway and pounces on him. But apparently she wasn't programmed with any Matrix-style kung fu and quickly gets overpowered by Nathan, who smashes one of her arms and starts to drag her back to her room, but gets interrupted by Kyoko poking him in the back with her handy kitchen knife. But Nathan doesn't really appreciate her ruining his shirt, so he uses the dumbbell to rearrange her face a bit, which gives Ava the opportunity to take the knife out of his back and put it somewhere a little easier for him to reach. Not thrilled about Ava's choice of knife placement, Nathan decides to try walking it off and goes for a little bug-eyed stroll down the hall, but doesn't get very far before collapsing and using his last breath to say Ava, who promptly comes over and steals his keycard since it doesn't really seem like he'll be needing it anymore. And as Caleb wakes up from his little nap on the floor, Ava comes in and asks him to wait in there for a bit. She then heads to Nathan's closet full of robo-babes, and after fitting herself with a new arm, she uses the rest of the bodies to make herself a pretty impressive skin suit. So after getting herself all dolled up, she uses Nathan's keycard and makes a beeline for the exit, leaving Caleb behind, locked in the facility. So finally passing her test to see if she was actually intelligent enough to escape, Ava makes it upstairs and outside to meet the waiting helicopter, ready to whisk her away to her beloved traffic intersection. And as Caleb tries in vain to escape, he realizes that he's failed his test and will now end up dying alone and helpless in the same glass prison as so many robo-babes before him.